Spoiler alert, you don't die. Now, I was taught meditation as a child, and I was also mentored by two Buddhist monks for many, many years. And I want to talk to you about death and the fact that really it's an illusion. Now, this sounds crazy, possibly sounds incredible. I'm going to use a story to explain this, and it's a true story that happened just yesterday. We were out in my garden. It was me and my son playing football on the grass, and my wife noticed a bumblebee was struggling on the patio. It was kind of crawling around, wasn't able to fly. So she went to get it some of this bee rescue stuff. We have some of this little fluid, like honey fluid, that can try and help revive bees. We wanted to look after it. We put some flowers in front of it, and it was eating or taking, whatever the terminology is, drinking some of the nectar from the flowers and some of this liquid that we'd put down. But it wasn't able to fly. It was just kind of crawling around. And we looked at it. We tried to keep an eye on it. As the hours went by, it was clear it wasn't moving. Obviously, we weren't watching it for hours and hours, but we'd check back on it quite regularly. And my son would be checking in on it as well. And then later that evening, as I was putting the dog out for the evening, I noticed that the bee had crawled close to the patio door and was actually kind of sheltering from the wind, but wasn't really moving too much. And then this morning, I noticed the limp body of the bee. The bee had essentially died, or at least that's what it appeared like. And I returned the bee to the earth in the garden. So that's the true story of what happened. But let's investigate what this means, and I'm using this story because when we talk about death ordinarily, it can be quite an emotional topic. It can be maybe about our death or the death of a loved one, a partner, or a family member, or a friend, and so on. And I'm using this story to try and remove that component of emotion from the equation, because that can cloud the issue. And I want to use this true story to investigate the nature of death so that we can get a clear answer on exactly what it was, if anything, that actually happened here. So let's talk about this. The bee, to all intents and purposes, you could say, well, the bee died, right? One day the bee was there, it was alive, it was crawling around, and the next day it was dead. I woke up today, saw the bee had died. Let's, though, before we jump to that conclusion, let's talk about what we mean by the bee in this case. Okay, when we say bee, what are we talking about? Because that's just a word, right? It's literally just a word that man or humankind has made for this particular aspect of reality. It's looked at all the many different aspects of reality, or those that it's come into contact with thus far, bearing in mind there are many other planets and galaxies out there that have aspects of reality that have not been named yet, or seen, of course, by the human mind. But the human mind has named this one aspect bee. And it has certain characteristics. It buzzes, it's black and yellow, it has wings, it's an insect, and so on. But does that actually have any reality to it? Does that concept bee actually exist as a separate entity in reality? Could you take that as that identifying factor with all the characteristics that make it a so-called bee? Could that exist in isolation from all the other aspects of reality? And of course, the answer is no. Right? If you take the flowers away from this system, the bee ceases to exist. If you take oxygen away from the system, the bee ceases to exist. If you take the planet away, the bee ceases to exist. And if you take the awareness away that is aware of this buzzing black and yellow object in the first place, then of course there's no awareness of it. So this concept bee, the buzzing bee, is just a concept. It's just an idea. It's what the human mind has said, it's taken this totality of all that there is, and it's looked at a tiny aspect of it, a refraction of the total, and to try and make sense of it and try and define it, it's given this tiny aspect of it a name, B, and it's assigned attributes to it. It buzzes, it's black and yellow, it's an insect, it has wings, and so on. But that is not the truth of what a bee is. That is not the truth of what a bee is. Because when we say bee, it's merely a word. To the bee, it is not a bee. It doesn't fly around thinking, I'm just this isolated, one individual separate aspect of reality, and I'm called B because this other aspect of reality over there has decided to name me this, and I have this restricted, reality. It doesn't. So the only thing truly which died is the idea of B. And it was purely an idea in the first place. Now, by this kind of continuation of logic, you can argue, rightly so, that the flower is not a flower because the flower cannot exist without the earth. You can't take the flower and say, okay, let's take this flower outside of the universe. Let's take it outside of the totality. It is the totality. Just the same as the bee. Everything is interconnected, not as separate individual things, but there is only one thing. There is only reality. There's only one reality. If there was another reality, it would also be real and would be part of one singular reality. So this idea of separation, that that's a bee and that's a flower, is not truth. That is a mental construct by the human mind. It's not the truth. Just like as you say, oh, that's a tree, the moment you define and start labeling things like this, you live in ignorance because you're not truly seeing the full picture of the totality. So when you look out or you're walking in nature and you see a tree, you say, there's a tree, that is useful for communication, for definition, for labels and so on, for categorization. But it's not the truth. Because a tree is not a tree. A tree, if you take that tree, what you say is a tree, and you yank it and remove the earth from the equation, remove the sunlight, remove the rainwater, remove the nutrients, it no longer is tree. And it can't have its own separate reality because otherwise it would be separate to everything that is. You can't take that tree and say, let's just put it outside of the universe for a few seconds to prove that it has its own separate entity, its own separate reality. It doesn't. It's part of the total. It's part of the total whole. So when you see this in this way, and this is not a belief system, this is a fact, you can extend this to every so-called thing, including thoughts. Well, no, they're my thoughts. I control them. They pop up, but they're not separate to any of this. They can't exist without everything else. They're not separate to all that there is. And it's the same with you. So if we go back to the story of the bee, initially we might say, well, look, the bee died. I have this concept of what a bee is this individual little thing. It's alive when it moves in a certain way, and it's dead when it stops moving and no longer moves, and therefore it has died. The bee has died. But as I've hopefully explained to you now, and you can investigate this for yourself, there is no reality to that bee. There's no truth to a bee as a separate entity. It was merely the idea, the concept. So this morning when I saw the bee and I took that bee and placed it back in the earth, placed it on the earth, paid a small respect for the duty the bee does in the grand scheme of everything, really nothing had changed. The totality still is. And the awareness with which the bee was observed and the awareness with which the body of the bee was observed, that awareness always is. And everything in this totality occurs in awareness. Awareness is the totality. Now, a mistake could be saying, well, yes, there's this human body mind here and it produces awareness, right? There's something going on in the mind. We don't fully understand it, but it makes consciousness. And when this body dies, like if this head was to get chopped off right now, after a period of seconds, there would be no consciousness and no awareness. And this body mind would be dead and consciousness would be dead. But there's no proof that consciousness is produced by the mind or the body. No proof. In fact, all of science completely ignores consciousness and awareness and engages purely in an observer and an observed relationship. I, the scientist, am the observer, and I am observing the observed. There's very little investigation done into the nature of the awareness that is the observing without an observer being present. So this concept of the bee, there is no bee, it's just an idea, it's not separate to all that there is, it's an aspect of all that there is similar to this idea of light. When you shine white light into a prism, into a glass prism, it refracts into a rainbow. It divides up the white or colorless light into its constituent parts, some of which you can't make out even with the human eye. So when you see that rainbow or you see a red colored light coming out of that prism, that's not the true nature of light. It's a refraction of the totality. It's an aspect of the whole. And this is the same with you. When you say I, if you mean I, John Doe, the body mind, the identity with the story and the history, that's a concept. It's nothing more than a concept. So awareness is the only thing that is. If you think of every object, experience, sensation, relationship, thought, everything that's ever appeared to you, it's all happened within awareness. The awareness has literally breathed life into the totality. So when we say that awareness is all that there is, we don't mean the limited awareness of a human mind. We mean a greater, a global awareness or universal awareness. So there's an intelligence at play here, greater than the human mind, an overarching intelligence that is reality. I equate awareness to global consciousness, to reality, to this intelligence. They all mean the same thing. They're all words struggling to try and define this underlying substrate of truth and reality that is beyond mind. Now, this intelligence cannot die. It cannot die. If you imagine there's a field of corn, okay, there's a field of corn. What made the corn grow? Like you might say, well, it was sunlight, maybe it was fertilizer, or it was rain, it was a combination of these things, nutrients. But what is the intelligence that turns a kernel of corn into corn? What is that intelligence? Not the biomedical or the molecular structure or whatever. What is the intelligence that makes that happen? What is the intelligence that produces a bird, what we call bird? What is that intelligence? Now, if that field of corn was burned to the ground, but there were still roots in there, it would grow again. Or if there was one single kernel of corn and it was put back into the burnt ground, it would grow again. Where does that intelligence come from? What is that intelligence? It's undying. It's beyond death. Now you might say, well, okay, if we burn the field to the ground and we dig up all the soil and we put, radiation in there and we drop nukes on it and everything, the corn will never grow again in that field. But the intelligence innate in each kernel of corn that converts it into this huge plant is the same intelligence that births stars, the same intelligence that creates birdsong, the same intelligence that is making your heart beat right now. And whether the so-called bee dies or the so-called you dies, the intelligence lives on. And the intelligence is what you really are. I hope this has been helpful for you. And now you can just rest and just, to paraphrase, just be.